Hey Colts, it's Mrs. Hladun. Sorry that I look a little crazy. It's Sunday and we've been very busy doing chores today and a lot of cleaning, and we're working on our garage and doing stuff outside, and so this is what you get. Anyways, I hope that you're having a lovely weekend. Today I'm going to do a little bit of reading from the book The Secret Garden. We are going to read chapter 4 today, and the last chapter we read, chapter 3, we found Mary taking a train ride from London out to Misselthwaite Manor. And at the end of chapter 3, she got to see Misselthwaite Manor. And you might remember that it was kind of interesting. It was a huge house. There were there was armor in the hallway and a big entryway. And she was led to 2 rooms and told those would be her spaces and not to leave. So we'll find out what happens from there. So this chapter 4, is called Martha. So I'm going to try to put the phone down and I'm going to read. So here we go. Sorry, this isn't a very cute view, but it is what it is. Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments and then began to look around the room. She had never seen a room at all like it and thought it was curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry and with a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was the glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of a deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land which seemed to have no trees on it, and it looked rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out of the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there?" she said. "Yes, that's the moor," she said with a good-natured grin. Does the like it?" "No," answered Mary, "I hate it." "That's 'cause they're not used to it," Martha said, going back to her hearth. "That thinks it's too big an old bear now, but that will like it." "Do you?" inquired Mary. "Aye, that I do," answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. "I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with growing things. It smells sweet. It's fair lovely in the spring and summer when the gorse and the broom and the heathers in flower. It smells o' honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and the skylarks make such nice noises, hummin' and singin'. I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she had been used to in India were not the least like this. They were obsequious and servile, and did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were their equals. They made salams and called them protectors of the poor, and names of that for short. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry. Can you believe that? She wondered what this little girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap back if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. "You are a strange servant," she said from her pillows, rather haughtily. Martha sat up on her heels, with her blacking brush in her hand, and laughed, without seeming the least out of temper. I know that," she said. "If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have even one of the under housemaids. I might have been let to be a scullery maid, but I'd never have been let upstairs. I'm too common, and I talk too much Yorkshire. But this is a funny house, for all it's so grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress, except Mr. Pitcher and Mrs. Medlock. Mr. Craven, he won't be troubled about anything when he's here, and he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she would never have done it if Misselthwaite had been big like the other big houses." "Are you going to be my servant?" Mary asked, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub her grate again. "I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant," she said stoutly, "and she's Mr. Craven's, but I do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit, but you won't need much waiting on." "Who's going to dress me?" demanded Mary. Martha sat up on her heels again and stared. She spoke in broad Yorkshire in her amazement. "Canada dress thyself?" she said. "What do you mean? I don't understand your language." I forgot," Martha said. "Mrs. Medlock told me I'd have to be careful, or you wouldn't know what I was saying." "I mean, can't you put on your own clothes?" "No," answered Mary, quite indignantly. "I never did in my life. My ayah dressed me, of course." "Well," said Martha, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent, It's time this should learn. That cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on thine self a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools, what with nurses and being washed and dressed and took out on walks as if they were puppies. It is different in India, said Mistress Mary disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not at all crushed. I can see it's different, she answered almost sympathetically. I dare say it's because there's a lot of blacks there instead of respectable white people. When I heard you were coming from India, I thought you was black too. Mary sat up in her bed furious. What? She said, what? You thought I was a native? You daughter of a pig. Martha stared and looked hot. Who you call a name? She said. You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. I've nothing against the blacks. When you read about 'em in tracts, they're always very religious. You read as a black man's and a brother. And I've never seen a black man, and I was very pleased to think I was going to see one close. When I came in to light your fire this morning, I crept up to your bed and pulled the cover back carefully to look at you. And there you was, disappointedly, no more black than me. And for all you're so yeller. Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. You thought I was a native. You dared. You don't know anything about natives. They are not people. They're servants who must salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything. She was in such a rage and felt so helpless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she felt suddenly so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face downward on the pillows and burst into a passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. You mustn't cry like that there, she begged. You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything, just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying. There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way which had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. It's time for thee to get up now, she said. Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and the tea and dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on with thy clothes, if that'll get you out of bed. If the buttons are at the back, that cannot button them up thyself. When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes that Martha took from her wardrobe were not the ones she'd worn when she arrived the night before with Miss Medlock. Those are not mine, she said. Mine are black. She looked at the thick white wool coat and dress over and added with cool approval, Those are nicer than mine. These are the ones the must put on, Martha answered. Mr. Craven ordered Mrs. Medlock to get him in London. He said, I won't have a child dressed in black wandering around like a lost soul, he said. It'd make the place sadder than it is. Put color on her. Mother said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold back with black herself. I hate black things, said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she'd never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. Why doesn't thou put on thy own shoes, she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. My ayah did it, answered Mary, staring. It was the custom. She said that often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do the thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, It's not the custom, and one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her, things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings and picking up things after she let them fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick things up and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in the moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones, who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and stumble over things. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk, but Mary only listened to her coldly and wondered about her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all, she said. There's 12 of us. My father only gets 16 shilling a week. I can tell you my mother's put it to the porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on the moor, and they play there all day, and Mother says the air of the moor fattens 'em. She says they believe they eat grass the same as wild ponies do. Our Dickon, he's 12 years old, and he's got a pony he calls his own. Where did he get it? Asked Mary. He found it on the moor with its mother when it was a little one, and he began to make friends with it and give it bits of bread and pluck young grass for it, and it got to like him, so it follows him about and it lets him get on its back. Dickon's a kind lad, and animals like him. Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own, and she'd always thought she should like one, so she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, as if she never before had any interest in anyone but herself. It was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room, which had been made into a nursery for her, she found it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy old pictures on the walls and a heavy old oak chair. A table in the center was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she'd always had a very small appetite, and she looked for something more than indifference at the first plate Martha sat before her. I don't want it, she said. Thou doesn't want thy porridge? Martha exclaimed incredulously. No. Thou doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it and a bit of sugar. I don't want it, repeated Mary. Said Martha. I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes. Why? Said Mary coldly. Why? Echoed Martha. Because they scarce have ever had their stomachs full in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes. I don't know what it is to be hungry, said Mary, with an indifference of ignorance. Martha looked indignant. Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough, she said outspokenly. I've no patience with folks as sit and stares at good bread and meat. My word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em were here under their pinafores. Why don't you take it to them, suggested Mary. It's not mine, answered Martha stoutly. And this isn't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for Mother and give her a day's rest. Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. You wrap up warm and run out and play, you, said Martha. It'll do you good and give you stomach for your meat. Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out! Why should I go out on a day like this? Well, if that doesn't go out, that'll have to stay in. And what's that? What has that got to do? Mary glanced around her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared her nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? She inquired. Martha stared. You'll go by yourself, she answered. You'll have to go learn to play like the other children does when they haven't got sisters or brothers. Our Dickens goes off on the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's got sheep on the moor that know him, and birds come and eats out of his hands. However little there is to eat, he always saves a bit of bread to coax his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she wasn't aware of it. There would be birds outside, though there wouldn't be ponies or sheep. They would be different from the birds in India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots and showed her the way downstairs. If that goes round that way, thou will come to the gardens, she said, pointing to a gate in the wall of shrubbery. There's lots of flowers in the summertime, but there's nothing blooming now. She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, one of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary, in spite of herself. Here was another locked door added to the hundreds in the strange house. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so suddenly. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There's Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing. I must run. After she was gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door in the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the garden which no one had been in for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like and if there were any flowers still alive in it. When she passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in a great garden with wide lawns and winding walks with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old gray fountain in its midst. but the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden, which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk out into a garden. And at that, I'm gonna pause because this is a really, really long chapter. We're only about halfway through it, but we've already read for 15 minutes. So I'm gonna pause there, and tomorrow we'll keep reading from the secret garden, and maybe we'll get to find out where the gate is, where the secret garden is. I just want to remind you guys, this book is a really old book. It was written over 100 years ago. So some of the language is a little bit different than we're used to, for sure. And some of the ways people treated each other were really different. Like, I don't know anybody in Lincoln who has servants. And if a child spoke to an adult the way that Mary is speaking to Martha, probably that wouldn't go over very well. So interesting how things have changed, and how people who come from a place of having a lot of money, or a place of privilege, we call that, how their expectations of their world are different than maybe yours or mine. So anyways, we'll learn more about our friend Mary tomorrow when we keep reading. I hope you have a great day, Colts. See you soon. Bye.